'Tis I.
Hey everyone, glad to see you back, glad to see you looking fresh, and today in Pokemon, I wanted to be talking about Pokemon types and what would I do if I could create my own type. This is a video idea I've been tossing around for a long time before coming up with the idea of Pokemon, and just the whole idea of like a new type, coming up on generation 10 soon enough, and it's a great number to put a new type at. And what type would I choose? Space has come up a lot. Sound has come up a lot. Light still exists, even though Fairy is basically the light type at this point. So what type would I choose? It'd be none of those. I've always liked the idea of a new type, and the one that I came up with, workshopped, came up with types that it's good against, types that it's bad against, what Pokemon I would turn into it, is the dinosaur type. So this is going to work like how Bug and Dragon, and somewhat like Fighting type, in how these Pokemon are used to like describe their appearance more than like the abilities that they possess. Like a bug. What's a bug power? What's a dragon power? It's how they look. It describes their appearance more than it describes their output of power. And so when crafting the dinosaur type, there are 3 groupings of Pokemon that will fit into this mold of when going back and retooling old Pokemon. And I'm going to start with like how the type is going to work against other types. But then I'll go back and talk about what Pokemon I will turn into the dinosaur type. How is this type going to work? The dinosaur type is going to work as a little bit of a balance to other types while also carving its own niche into the meta of Pokemon. I didn't want to design this type to be overpowered. I didn't want this design this type to be too weak. I obviously didn't play test this. I didn't run numbers. I'm not a VGC expert by any means. I just know somewhat like what types are good, what types are not good, and I just kind of ran with what types aesthetically and hypothetically what would be good against a dinosaur and what would be bad against a dinosaur. So let's start with offensively. What types would the dinosaur be good against? So I think the dinosaur should be good against fairies. When coming up with the idea of the dinosaur type, I thought as kind of a sidekick to dragon types. A lot of dinosaur-esque Pokemon are given the dragon type because dinosaur doesn't exist yet. And so it being like a side character to dragons, because at the time of making this video, there's not going to be enough dinosaurs to overtake the number of dragons. So it being able to work alongside the dragon type and take out the fairy menace, I like the concept of. And plus fairy needs a debuff in some certain way. So creating a new type is a really good way to do that. Giving it a third weakness that is offensively going to be a lot better than the 2 types it's already weak to is a great idea, in my opinion. The second type it's going to be good against is water. So water is another type that defensively has been strong for a long time. Only having 2 weaknesses, both of them are very common. They're not bad types. It's not like fairy where the 2 types it's weak to are more defensive than offensive. Electric and grass can put some power behind their punches. But I just like the idea of like taking water down a peg, it being a starter type being that good. I don't know. And it never sat well perfectly with me, so giving it a little bit of a debuff makes a lot of sense to me. And finally, probably the most controversial one, I think the dinosaur would be good against normal type Pokemon. So normal type is a weird type when discussing it in the grand spectrum of other types. It's only weak to 1 type. It's not good against any types. It's resisted by a couple types, but it just kind of sits to hit neutral across a lot of things. I think defensively, normal is one of the strongest types in the game with 1 weakness and 1 immunity. And I don't think normal really needs a nerf, but I think dinosaur needed 1 more thing to be good against, to not just be existent and like, why does this type exist? It doesn't hit a lot of things for super effective damage. But I like the idea of it taking out normal types as well. So what offensively is it going to be deflected by? So it doesn't have any Pokemon types that are immune to dinosaur. There are 4 types that are going to be defensively strong against the dinosaur. First up is Rock. I think that Rock, for being a quote-unquote defensive type, has a lot of things that are good against it, so let's give it one that's bad against it. And also, dinosaurs, Stone Age, the course of evolution, dinosaurs wouldn't have won out. I'm going to go with Bug, because this is a little bit of a Jurassic Park reference. Like, the bugs were the ones that survived in the amber. None of them survived, but the amber encased the mosquito that held the dino DNA, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But bug and dinosaur are going to have this relationship between the two of them. Ice, because dinosaurs and the Ice Age don't really work well together. Plus, there's a good way to buff the ice type and the bug type as well. Both of them defensively are horrid, so a nice bump to them would be a great addition to the dinosaur legacy. And steel, I just think steel is better at being defensive than offensive, and I think it can resist another type just fine. When it lost the ghost and the dark type, I didn't love when they took away those resistances, so giving it another one back, I think is fine. We back up to the same amount of resistances that it once had, because it also resists fairy, so I don't think it makes steel overpowered or anything. I think that's just steel's gimmick, is that it resists like everything. Dinosaur would be included in that. So defensively, when something is attacking a dinosaur, what's good against a dinosaur, what's bad against a dinosaur? What hurts the dinosaurs most are going to be ice, the Ice Age thing. We talked about this already. Boosts ice type as well, giving it another type it's good against, give it a type that it's resistant to. The dinosaur are going to be weak to ice type. I just think that makes sense. Cold-blooded reptiles are not going to do well against the cold. It just makes sense. The next type it's going to be weak to is poison. I think giving poison more offensive capabilities. I like the buff it got against fairies. I'm going to give it a little bit more of an edge in competitive because of dinosaur. Poison has been a weirdly nerfed type since its inception, only being good against one type. Now being against 3 types, I think is a cool idea, and it just thematically makes sense. Like, would a dinosaur do good against a toxin? Probably not, so I like the idea of it. Of course, the bug type, we were talking about this earlier, the mosquito taking the blood of the dinosaur, holding onto it for millions of years. Of course, we're going to give the bug the buff that they need to take down the dinosaurs. And finally, it's not good against fire. The meteor is the thing that took out dinosaurs. It should be the thing that can take out a dinosaur in Pokemon as well. Does fire need a buff? No, but it's not an incredible type. But I like thematically that it works, so I'm going to include it. Defensively, what is dinosaur good against? First off, fairy. Fairy are not going to be able to hit dinosaurs very well. Like I said, it kind of works hand in hand. It's the opposite sidekick of a dragon, where dragons are weak to and can't even touch fairy. Dinosaurs are going to be able to take out and defend against fairies very well. And fairy, kind of sitting as the pseudo-light type of the Pokemon world, I want to include the rest of the types that sit in those weird bubble by themselves. That includes Ghost, Dark, and Psychic. None of them are going to be able to hurt a dinosaur very well. Because would a dinosaur care about the idea of darkness or ghosts or hurting the mind? How are you going to hurt a mind of something that's the size of a walnut? Like, it's not going to work very well. The idea could be played around that's like, well, you'd be able to mind trick somebody more because of that, but I don't play with the idea. I also want to include those types more into other types, because those 3 kind of sit in their own weird little triangle and don't play with other types very much. So them being able to be included with the dinosaur as well, I think include 4 good resistances and 4 weaknesses. Those are how the stats are going to play out of the dinosaur. I don't think I made him too overpowered. I don't think I made him too weak. I think I balanced him okay. So what Pokemon would I include in making the dinosaur type? So like I said, there was 3 groups of Pokemon that I considered for this and that will be included in this. The first group are Pokemon that just look like dinosaurs. I think that's the most obvious. The second group are Pokemon that look like Kaiju. Tyranitar doesn't really look like a dinosaur in particular. He does look a heck of a lot like Godzilla though, who is iconic Kaiju. So Kaiju Pokemon are going to be included in the dinosaur type. And finally, fossils. I never liked that fossils are always rock types. It doesn't make sense. Are you telling me that an Ammonite back millions of years ago was a rock type Pokemon? That every fossil was a rock type Pokemon? Just because it comes out of a rock doesn't mean it should always be a rock now. It doesn't make sense to me. So it kind of fits 3 molds. Dinosaur sits in this idea of like, it looks like a dinosaur, or a Kaiju Those are the descriptive factors, and then it also works as like this ancient type, ancient prehistoric Pokemon that work really well with this type as well. I'm going to break down every Pokemon. I'm going to be retooling into dinosaur type. What types I would replace with a dinosaur type, and this is a little bit of a discussion point as well, because when Fairy came out, it was either replacing normal type, added to types, or, I mean, that was it. The only type it would replace is normal. For me, I'm going to be replacing other types and other Pokemon. I'm not going to be eradicating entire, like, iconic Pokemon types entirely. I am going to be taking a good number of rock types just because of, you know, the fossils being all rock types. A lot of those are going to get replaced out. When retooling, I'm not just going to be replacing a single type or adding it to types, or adding it to Pokemon that only had one type before. Some of them are like that, but a lot of them are going to get replaced of other types as well. That's just how it's going to be for my creation. So here are all of the Pokemon that I'm going to be retooling into dinosaur type Pokemon. There are a good number, more than I even expected when going through the Pokedex when creating this list, and I'm impressed with how many we were able to create. And, you know, with a new generation, obviously going to showcase a lot of new dinosaurs, can very quickly become a Pokemon type that actually has a good number to choose from, good number of families to pick from. Because right now, Ice is the least represented type with only 69 Pokemon in that type. So it's not super hard number to jump to get there, especially with a new generation showcasing a good number of them. But I'm going to be talking about only fully evolved Pokemon. When talking about this, I'm talking about entire families as going through this. There's a lot of Pokemon to get to here, so I'm going to breeze through them. I'm not going to give massive descriptions, but you will see on screen what type they're going to be after I retool them. So let's start off with the fossils. I think that just makes the most sense because they're the biggest, clearest grouping. Ammonite, Kabutops, Aerodactyl, all of them, Gen 1 stuff, easily retooled. Cradilly, Armaldo, Gen 3s, obviously Gen 4s, your Bastiodons, your Rampardos, and then your Gen 6s, your Tyrantrums, and your Auroras. Entire families completely changed. None will evolve into dinosaurs, but they'll all be dinosaur types. I think that just aesthetically works. I like it a lot more than them all being rock types. I will not be touching the Galarian fossils because they're weird hybrids. If eventually we get the Pokemon that they were supposed to look like, I'm cool with giving whatever the heck the two Pokemon that ended up being Dracovish, you know, Dragon Dinosaur and Water Dinosaur respectively. But in the moment, no, those guys are what they are in their own aesthetic. One that doesn't really fit in any three of these is Sudowoodo. I think is a hilarious one to include in this type because it's wood that became rock like a fossil. Therefore, it would fit in with the fossil group, kind of, sort of, but it's not a fossil Pokemon. I think it's a hilarious Pokemon to have actually be a rock dinosaur type. So for this group, we'll talk about the Kaiju group. So there's not a ton of Kaiju Pokemon. There are some, but these are the ones that I would be retooling into dinosaur types. The most obvious, like I said, Tyranitar. And if we're talking about Tyranitar, we have to include his Mechagodzilla to his Godzilla. That's going to be Iron Thorn. And while on this discussion, the Paradox stuff, while I would love to turn all of the past Paradox Pokemon into dinosaur types, considering not all the future ones are not all steel types, even though they're called Iron Blank in their name, I'm not going to do that, even once I want to. I will include one, though, Great Tusk. That's going to be our dinosaur rep of the past Paradox Pokemon. The rest of the Kaijus are going to include Malamar, I know weird Kaiju to be calling a dinosaur, but I still really like it, how we're going to have some weirdo Pokemon in this type. It's not just going to be obvious ones, because like if a Gumi, if that's a dragon, a Malamar can be a dinosaur. And then the last couple are Nidoking and Nidoqueen. These two are based loosely, I think, on Baragon, another classic Kaiju, so I think including them would work. A couple of moths I wanted to include for Mothra, but there's not one that's clearly a Mothra Pokemon, so I didn't take any of the moths. And then the rest of these are Pokemon that look like dinosaurs. These include Lapras, Aggron, Tropius, Relicanth, Mamoswine, Haxorus, Komao, and Baxcalibur. All those I think are pretty obvious. These are dinosaur Pokemon, Some of them, like I said, have been called dragons just because dinosaur type didn't exist yet. Now, there are a few more that I'll talk more about because they're a little bit more controversial that I've chosen them to be on here. So, when talking about Hydreigon, I don't know how to play with it. I think Dino should be a dinosaur. It's literally named Dino. Hydreigon, though, has like dragon in his name. It's a Hydra dragon. So where do I make it? Do I make the whole family like dinosaur dragon? No, I think dark type is as much a part of them as the dragon type. So I think this is going to be our one example of something evolving out of the dinosaur type. So either Dino and then Zwelios being dinosaurs and then Hydreigon being dark dragon. I think that's how it's going to play versus the whole family becoming dinosaur type. And then the last group, and this is going to be a controversial one, I'm going to be retooling Torterra and Meganium into dinosaurs as well. They're obviously dinosaurs, looking at them. Retooling starters is controversial in and of itself. I wouldn't have touched them if Pokemon Legends Arceus didn't already create versions of different types. Now, what I'm doing is a little bit crazier than that. I'm retooling them for their entirety. I'm not just creating new variants for them. I'm calling Meganium a grass dinosaur as well as Torterra a grass dinosaur. And Torterra being a ground type has made sense. I think it being a dinosaur type makes more sense. And Meganium really would like that buff to showcase itself outside of its two much more popular brethren in its Gen 2 repertoire. But those are all the Pokemon families that'll be retooled into dinosaur types. What do you think about this type? Do you think it's interesting? Do you think it's stupid? By all means, let me know what type would you create, kind of how it would work in the type tree. This is a topic that's super interesting to me. Like I said, dinosaur type, if it did happen, that's awesome. It's a really niche idea, one that, like I said, I created. I'm sure I've heard it come up before, but like I designed this type, I designed the type interactions, like I picked the Pokemon, this was fully me, and thank you so very much for watching. As always, like this if you like this, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you at some point.